Hey everybody, welcome to the Growing with Fishes podcast, episode 158. This week's going to be a little bit of a different show. We're just going to do a shorter episode, talk about some stuff that we wanted to talk about. Originally, we were going to have Dr. Colin Bell on, but he ended up getting stuck at the airport, so he's going to just join us next Thursday instead. Love him and his products, and he's an awesome dude. Can't speak highly enough about him, and we will have him on for next Thursday. Fortunately, he ended up getting stuck because of airplane delays. So, um, much love to Colin, and I hope he makes it safe. How you doing there, Mr. Green Jeans?
Doing great. Glad to be here. How are you, Steve?
Doing good. So, tell us what you've been up to in your garden.
Oh,
I know you talk about watering.
yeah, watering. So much watering. Yeah, because we're in Southern California. I mean, this is Los Angeles. The plants are using crazy water now, and the humidity is well. No, actually, we kind of get a little bit more humidity recently, but still, plants are just sucking up water. You can't believe how much water a cannabis plant needs. It's just, I mean, everybody out there, water your plants. And I know a bunch of my friends here in Los Angeles, everyone seems to have a plant in their backyard. Everyone's growing this year too, and not everybody has one in the ground. If it's in the ground, it's it's a lot harder to underwater. A lot of people are growing plants in containers right now, and those are very much in danger of being underwatered unless you've got a good size runoff tray under that baby, or unless it's still a tiny little plant in a gigantic pot. But cannabis plants never stay little plants in big pots. They only stay for like 1 week, and then 2 weeks later the plant is already outgrowing its pot. So either it's time to replant, or to repot that baby, or stick a tray underneath it and water it like crazy. I made a video yesterday about repotting a big plant. I think Mrs. Green Jeans put it on my Instagram. I don't know if anybody wants to look at that, but I took a big plant out of a 2.5 gallon pot and stuck it in a 3.5 gallon pot. Needed to get up canned. But oh, another thing, yes, about watering is that people don't. This is something from Elaine Ingham's channel. It was so cool the way she mentioned this on one of her podcasts, on one of her things on YouTube. She talked about rooting, how important it is for plants to have deep roots. She was talking about in terms of nutrients. The plants looking how much food is available in the soil, and she made the comparison to how extensive is the plant's roots. How much roots does this plant have? So and you know what, I know the discussion. It's on her one where she shows a gigantic plug of grass. They dug up a section of grass with a PVC pipe, and took the PVC pipe apart and showed how much roots there are below this grass. And the old myth is that there's as many roots below the plant as there is mass above the plant, which is kind of true. But in this, but not really. I mean, obviously, this was an excellent example of times when the rule doesn't really hold, because Elaine showed where they had cut this grass twice. They'd cut it two times. They'd planted it about 5 or 6 months ago, and so the grass was only about 3 inches long, but the roots were a good 5 or 6 or 7 feet down from the plant. So, the idea that when we trim grass roots, that the roots are only down 3 inches or whatever, is not really true. And so, when we consider that plants' roots could be convinced to go down a lot deeper than they normally do, what's that doing is accessing all these other nutrients. You know what I mean? So when we talk about how much nutrients are available to a plant, we're really only talking about how much nutrients are available to the plant in that amount of root zone. But if you water in such a way as to get the roots to go down further in the soil. And so what's the key of doing that? The key of doing that is not frequently. It means watering heavily, watering thoroughly, but then holding off until the roots have a chance to grow down further in search of water, down further in the soil. So that sounds, like what I just said. Don't forget to water your plants. Okay, now you're saying don't water them. Well, yeah, watering is like the high kung fu of gardening. It's with accurate watering, you could get your roots way down into the soil, and then that plant is accessing all kinds of other nutrients that it wouldn't otherwise be able to do. We see it all the time here in Los Angeles when people plant fruit trees. It's very, very common for people not to water them accurately enough in the first couple of years. So you'll see a tree like a semi-tropical tree like a cherimoya or a sapote, and 3 or 4 years later, it's barely any bigger than it was before. And the reason why is because it wasn't really accurately watered. It was never watered, when it needed it. It hadn't been encouraged to grow its roots down deeply and access all those nutrients and everything like that. So it just took longer. Eventually those plants, those trees like that will catch up. You see them catch up, but I can walk up and down my street and see many trees that have been planted recently, which are languishing for the first couple of years, just because they're not really getting enough water. They're trying to live with root systems only down 2 or 3 feet deep, and they're barely hanging on. So anyway, that's my rave. Everybody, water like crazy. Watering is the key, and it's more important than nutrients, right? Light, and then water. Without the water, how are the nutrients going to get there, right? The nutrients depend on, well, maybe not the CO2 doesn't depend on the number one nutrient, but all the soil-borne nutrients depend on, the water to deliver them. So anybody got anything to say about that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely probably the hardest part of soil growing for sure is getting a feel on what, and it's probably the hardest thing to teach someone also. It's one of the hardest things to take to scale also. It's just, it's a problem that comes up a lot. And so with a lot of different ways to solve it, but, if you don't have consistency in your environment and you don't have, then it can be difficult because, certain parts of it will need more water than others, and if it's not adjustable in the right zone, you need to be able to do it. And it can be hard to do commercial watering that's adjustable. It's expensive. Everywhere if you got 800 plants, you have to add another adapter with a valve. Even if you're doing drip systems, in a lot of cases, anything that's adjustable is more expensive. And then and it's just a difficult thing to teach. You have your different ways of determining whether or not you need to water, which is great. And you can calculate out times, and people have little tips that you can go by to be able to do it. But even different strains, like stuff that you haven't done before. It's like one of the reasons why we advocate so much for test environments for commercial stuff is because you don't want to throw out a huge amount of plants that you haven't really grown before and run even just the risk of a much lower yield or any type of complete loss per plant can be difficult. And sometimes it can just be really finicky about how much water they want. OGs are kind of famous for being finicky about their grow environment, especially if you want to get a lot of production as opposed to just quality. Even your Girl Scout cookies and stuff like that can be pretty finicky in terms of quantity or yield, quantity of yield, but maybe not quality. It usually comes out really good. So you have your big producers like Blue Dream and stuff like that are just going to be better if you're more consistent, how to water it. But watering's just, for soil growing, is tough. And it is one of the things that I think is so nice about dual root zone is you only have 2 waterings before it hits the water in the aquaponic system. and then you're kind of done. Like as long as you have your flood and drain system, which I saw somebody in chat asked about if you do flood and drain or constant flow in a commercial system. I'd still definitely do flood and drain. But yeah, I think that that it really simplifies and cuts down on the amount of hand watering that you would have to do to be able to keep plants at a and then they can just take up as much as they want to. They can, water themselves essentially and still have other parts of the root zone. They can take in air and the gas exchange with, like we talk about in the dual root zone, just helps that much more. So by eliminating probably the hardest part of teaching and scaling cannabis is kind of, not necessarily neutralized, but, cut down on significantly by doing aquaponics or
Marty, you really nailed. Sorry.
I was going to say with the dual root zone, like with the one we're building, we have it automated to where we'll have a one system, and I can turn it on in sections or per row. It has a little column, and I have a feed line, and then it's set on a certain timer that floods a separate column. Or I'm sorry, not column. Sorry, I hit my head earlier today, and I'm a little bit foggy. That's a whole other story I'll get to a little later. I tripped and fell and slammed my head on a thing. Yeah, so there's a guy in chat says the aquaponic god always shitting on media beds and commercial systems. That guy doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. That's the same guy that's pushing the MBBRs and a bunch of other failed technologies. The guy just goes on and rants and raves like a lunatic, and then doesn't actually know what he's talking about 85% of the time. I don't know. So you absolutely can have media beds in a commercial setup. We're actually doing 6,000 square feet of media beds. And what we're doing is that there's a bell siphon in each one. We have a master fill line. We have a drain line for each row. I actually have been posting some pictures of it. Anyone that's been following, I'll show you the pictures of the full facility when it's we're about to finish plumbing the main greenhouse. But with the dual root zone, so we have a separate manifold that goes to top water all of those plants separately from the flood and drain at the bottom, and all it is just a little ring that goes around the plant, and that feeds to a central manifold that floods from the bottom upwards, so it purges any air and allows us to have a very fine amount of control into how much each pot gets water. So this way I can set it to a few seconds or whatever, and I know that all of them got, half an ounce or an ounce of water or 8 ounces of water or whatever I'm trying to do. I can measure that, and because all of them are filling simultaneously at the same rate, because they're all being filled from the bottom, when it fills that manifold and then goes over a U to go back down to the plant itself, it allows us to have a ton of control and have it automated to where we can just flip a switch and turn the pump on for a little while, and it automates that whole top watering of all the soil all at once. This way we can set similar type plants with similar feeding. We will actually have 5 IBC totes that we can mix different nutrient mixes. So I could say, hey, this is for my heavy feeders. This one's for my stuff close to flower. This is for my stuff that's just starting up in early veg. And I can make up different formulas aside from the mineralization for top feeding, and then choose which tank I want to pull from and then run that to any manifold. It makes it a lot easier and makes it so that we can just mix up our batches and then go out to the greenhouse and hit a button and watch it get watered and not have to do anything. Go ahead, Mr. Regis.
Oh, sorry. I was thinking that what you said, Marty, about because we're this is an aquaponics channel, and this reason why I started thinking about this was because of the old issue of hydroponics, hydro yielding more, and a lot of people say, you can yield more with hydro, but you'll get better quality or something growing in containers in in natural soil, but the general, I think, feeling is that yield is lower in containers and in soil mix than in water cultures, not hydro, but in water culture systems. And that is probably true. And I think that the main reason is because of inaccurate watering, is inability to water. Because I think I've done quite a number of crops where I've equaled a water quality system with containers just by watering well, just by really giving plenty of water and making sure the plants never ever because really yield is the limitation. I mean, water is the limitation of yield. Water is what limits yield more than nutrients. The idea that nutrients are the thing that sets the limit on yield, I don't really agree with that. I don't really believe that. I really think that sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
I've put plants out the last week of July and pulled them down. They were 13 feet tall and 4.5 to 6 pounds per plant, and that was put out last week of July in an aquaponic setup.
Yeah.
So absolutely, the water unlimited access to water can really accelerate growth rate and yield. Sure.
Yes, and cannabis never gets enough water in containers. It never. I'll tell you why. Because when you immediately after you repot, in 1 week, that plant is starting to get root bound. In 2 weeks, you know what I mean? Its roots are limited immediately. I'm sorry, during veg. Once it starts flowering, actually at a certain point, depending on its genetics, it's going to stop growing its roots anywhere, and that's a whole nother issue. But for sure, water is the limitation of yield in general, all around, and it really makes a big difference with cannabis. So everybody out there growing in soil and containers really need to up their game with watering much more, and need to concentrate on a lot more than nutrients. Nutrients they're important, but they're secondary in importance to the water. The main difference is in that the reason why your aquaponics yields so much is basically just because the plants are getting good water. They're also getting a great quality of nutrients, and there's a bunch of other things too. But I'm just saying that, in my opinion, the primary thing that's moving all that is the watering. So,
constant access to water, I think, is what is the easiest to accomplish in aquaponics, because especially flood and drain aquaponics with dual root zone, because again, you can have you're in unlimited access to air through certain parts of the root zone and unlimited access to water through certain parts of the root zone. So really, it's kind of the best of both worlds. You can't really accomplish that very well in soil, right? Because if your water is occupying the space that your air normally takes up, and that's why you have to have, it can have them at different times in diminishing ratios, but you can't ever have them in that same balance that I think that you can get out of aquaponics or through sub-irrigated planters. And I think that's really the only other place that I've seen like rapid growth, like especially in veg where you get really fast growth. I feel like is coming from that constant access to water and air at the same time. And I think that the way that you listed all of those things in terms of importance, like you had light and water both above nutrients. I think access to that is kind of like, I would put those three in the same order. Like if you don't have quality light, you're not going to be able to achieve good photosynthesis over enough time to be able to create plant tissue. And then obviously you have the water, which is sort of what is fueling the entire thing, right? You can't really do it without pressure and water that can move throughout the plant. And then you have the, like the brick and mortar nutrients. And I think the plant can do a lot more with less nutrients than what, we originally thought we were doing by pushing high ppm stuff. And then, like we talked about microbes and triggering different things inside of genetics, which I think is still obviously valid conversation and stuff like we had on Tuesday. But if you just take those top three and you're just talking about growth, I think those are what, access to both water and light are going to be your top two. And then if you can also do nutrients, especially like you were talking about healthy, good source nutrients with a healthy diversity of microbes, then that, you know, that's essentially the top layer of our soil. That's what grows stuff outside and why it works inside, I think.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's pretty much my rave. I just wanted to really get on the watering thing, just because I know everybody's plants are really lacking in water right now. And if you're in containers, water heavily. Oh, well, one more thing I did actually, I think of one other thing about something that I do, and that is I use a pretty drainy mix in my soil mix. I know. So, in other words, I don't use like a Fox Farm type mix with a lot of loamy stuff in it. I put a lot of sand and gravel and kitty litter and things that drain a lot, and that makes it easy for me to leave a plant sitting in a runoff tray, you know, in a deep runoff tray. So it's so when you have a really drainy mix like that, it's almost like you're halfway hydroponic anyways. You can, you know, the plants they're getting a lot of oxygen at the roots anyway, and you can just let them sit in the water and they're still pretty happy. And another thing that made me think of too is completely submersing plants, because, you know, I've been for a couple of years now, I've been like dipping plants to, I tip them upside down and I water dip them to fight spider mites and things like that. And I was thinking the other day, because I just sit there and swish them up and down, but what if I stuck a plant and just, what if I had one of those big tall cylinder shaped reservoirs, and I just stuck the whole plant down all the way in underneath the water, you know, 3 or 4 feet underneath the water, and just left it there for a couple, 3, 5, 12 hours. I think it'd be fine. I think it's going to get plenty of oxygen, you know, I mean, if the water is oxygenated. And how would the spider mites feel about that? Being underwater for 12 hours? I don't think they'd like it too much. But anyway, anyone else have any thoughts on that? Does it sound like that would work? Because, you know, I get a small setup and I can experiment. I can try it. What do you think, Steve?
Plants. I wouldn't submerge your plants for anything more than 15 to 20 minutes.
No?
No, because they still need a gas exchange. Even if you have it you might be able to do it if you're hyper oxygenated it, but, you know, what we used to do at aquaponic sources, we actually had a tank that had a whole bunch of guppies in it and smaller fish, like aquarium fish, and we get aphids on the peppers in the showroom, and I would just take the pepper out of the grow bed, put a rubber band with a rock on the roots of it, and sink it to the bottom of the tank, and the little guppies and everything would sit there and eat, you know, gorge themselves on the aphids, and in about, you know, 5-10 minutes the thing was stripped clean.
Totally.
You know, and they wouldn't munch on the leaves at all.
We could do a service. You know those manicure. You know those little fish that like you put your feet in the water and they like manicure your feet, and you sit there and they, you know, bite off all the little. So there's something you go to Thailand or whatever, right, to get this.
Yeah, I've seen that before too.
We could do that. We should start a business. It's a great idea. We'll start like a. We'll find out what kind of fish love to eat spider mites, and just sink that plant under there with the whole school of these little mosquito fish or whatever they are, and they're like, hey, pick them all off. Integrated pest management. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm getting off.
So we had another question in chat is, have you heard any more about that combo probiotic earthbox aquaponic test that Alan is running? Love to hear more about dual root zone. I'm not sure about his test. I mean, I talked to him like last week, but I know that we have some earth boxes and we're using aquaponic water to water them. I don't know if that counts. They're not hard plumbed like I think Alan's are, but I think Marty might have fucked around with that a little bit.
So they weren't earth boxes, they were stub irrigated planters, and actually this picture that you're looking at right here was like Oregon Blackberry by Peach Frost, I think is what it was. And yeah, it worked really well. So these were sub-irrigated planters I made them myself, but they were basically homemade earth boxes. and then watered with aquaponic water from the system. So basically I would dose my aquaponic system with everything. Then I would take the water out to feed the sub-irrigated planters, and then I would replenish the water in the fish tank and top it back off. So that was my method, and that's the other than the original soil mix was basically just mostly homemade soil mix that I did here. It was originally Coots mix. That's from an aquaponic system, but all these right here. So this was 1, 2, 3. This is about 3 sub-irrigated planters worth under 660 watts of ceramic metal halide. So that's my sub-irrigated planter experiment. And I'll have some more pretty soon, moving 10 days. That's the countdown right now. So I'll be setting up some more experiments. I have 11.5 acres out there, so it's going to be interesting.
Are we talking about what we're gonna do up there yet, or no?
Not quite yet.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Marty's scheming. Good thing.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. So, but as far as the sub-irrigated planter goes, combined with aquaponics, his are actually going to be, so he'll be, I believe, using an automated system, just pumping into the reservoirs that will be linked together. He hasn't sent me the pictures like he promised to yet, but that's what we talked about beforehand. I don't know if he's changed it at all. So that would be the only difference, is I manually, because this was a pretty small setup, so I was just manually filling the reservoirs. And when it got pretty hot, I was having to refill the reservoirs about every other day, because they weren't very big reservoirs and they were drinking a lot. It's pretty warm. So it does require refilling a lot, but that was the method that I used to grow these, and they came out great.
They look amazing. The color of the leaves is really beautiful. It looks like there's a lot of, looks like you got a lot of fall foliage going there. Love that.
Yeah, so this was pretty late in the flower. This is probably like 6.5 weeks or so, something like that.
It's beautiful, very beautiful, and that shows, withholding nutrients too, nitrogen and stuff like that.
Yeah, you can see them start to fade out, and this was I think, and then they faded pretty hard after that. I don't know if I have any pictures from those, but here's kind of a close up. Super frosty.
There's a big discussion going on ICMag now about flushing, and about what that means and all that kind of stuff. People, trying to decide. Yeah. I mean, obviously, people think it means a lot of different things, but whether or not the withholding of the nutrients, which towards the end of whether that actually improves the quality or not, I'm absolutely convinced it does. To me, I'm not much of a debate in that area.
You can taste the fertilizer if it's not flushed. It'll give you that either right between the eyes headache or the back of the base of the skull headache.
Oh, that for sure. But I mean, also just even trying to, sort of end starve the plant a little bit during our past peak flowering, so the chlorophyll, goes down a little bit. I don't think I really do that. I don't think I really try to do that. I think my method, just with the small containers and everything, sort of automatically does that a little bit. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that doesn't really make any difference. I don't know. They do that in tobacco. I mean, that's what tobacco is. That's why the bottom leaves, if commercially they just harvest, I know, the whole plant. But if you have like you're growing your own and your gourmet tobacco, you're gonna harvest the most yellow lower leaves gradually as they yellow going up, because those ones taste better than ones that are full of chlorophyll. So it's the same in tobacco. I don't see why it would be different in cannabis. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
that debate comes up like once a week. And
yeah, right. I know. I didn't mean to bring up that stupid tire debate again, but sorry, everybody in chat.
No,
That's some boring shit. I know, but
no, I think it's always good to cover because I think the first issue you hit on right away, which is that it's people define it as different things, right? When I say I'm flushing and you say you're flushing, we're not really doing the same thing. So that's kind of the first thing that you have to establish is what was flushing even, how are you defining it for this conversation?
Precisely.
So not everyone's going to agree, right? So, and I think what it comes down to is the idea of lowering the amount of nutrients that are available to the plant later in flower.
Yeah.
So if that means you're feeding through a nutrient tea or you're feeding with hydro food, that means you're then going to be switching to just water in the later parts of flower for that definition of flushing.
Yeah.
But then you have living soil growers who will say, oh, well, all I water the plant the whole time is water. How can I flush anything?
Sure.
If that's all I'm doing. And so then you're going, okay, well, now you're talking about a growing method where you're putting in the amount of nutrients that are going to want to be available to the plant throughout its life cycle. So there you're adjusting your soil mix to not have excessive nutrients towards the end of flower, or else you can result in the same thing. So,
but some of those living soil guys, though, they'll grow in a bed, for example. I think that's the way like Soma grows.
Yes.
And some of these guys, and so it's a bed, and this is one of the reasons why I kind of formulated the idea that I'm pretty sure that when a cannabis plant doesn't want any more nutrients via the dirt, it stops growing its roots in search of them, and that's one of the best ways to tell that it's done looking that it would rather at this point it would rather use stored nutrients. So it prefers to use the stored nutrients. The nutrients down at the roots are just a stress to it, you know what I mean? Right. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it stops growing its roots in search of. So in Soma's beds, he could have very nutritious soil still sitting there a foot away from the plant, but the plant has stopped growing its roots and it's used up the nutrients in that zone, and it's not looking for any more anyways. And, you know, I think it's almost like a decision that the plant kind of makes. And then we sometimes with our methods, we fuck it up by still trying to force feed it and stuff like that. Well, when it's already said, okay, folks, I'm full, it's already backed away from the table kind of, you know? And anyway.
Right.
I mean,
I totally agree. And then just the other aspect of that, it can still exist and be an issue that you have to deal with in living soil or whatever your method is, that if your plant's still taking up a lot of nutrients towards the end of flower, the result, is probably going to be the same, and you just need to adjust accordingly. So depending on what your growing method is, then you just adjust whatever that is. If your soil mix needs to be less, if you need to top dress in flower earlier or not at all, like all of those different variables. However you're using your control of your nutrients, maybe you stop feeding microbes. Alan was talking about with his earth boxes that he stops adding microbes so that his plants will mature faster and not extend out longer. And so even there where you're not adding nutrients as being a concern, he's not adding as many microbes, because in his testing, he had multiple people come back and find out that they were having issues with plants not wanting to finish or taking longer to finish if they continue to feed microbes. Wow. So I thought, that's first of all, it's a great use of the group that he put together in Facebook, and having so many testers that can communicate back to you and catch something like that, and then be so cool as to like announce the change in something that, to say, hey, this is something that everybody needs to do that's bought all of our stuff. He made significant effort to tell people kind of like what we wanted. What was that company that their LED lights were fucked up with certain types of timers? Steve?
Oh, yeah.
Remember, it was the Spectrum King, and was it Black Dog?
What was that?
Who had the LED lights that wouldn't shut all the way off when you used
The black dogs.
black dogs?
Yeah,
So
black
what
dogs
dog didn't do.
it had a minimum amount of power. It had to pull at all times to. There was something really weird about the power draw on the black dogs that was causing them with controllers to where they weren't working right. And I remember, if you go back and listen to the episodes with Fish Ganja Guy, he talks all about it.
Right. So what we wanted them to do is what Alan did, which was reach out to the people once he found out there was an issue. They had lots of information to establish it. He put out all the information and said, to everyone saying, hey, this is how you should change it. And I felt like he made and had the ability to communicate with them in his group. Again, it was pretty powerful. But it just gives you an idea of as it moves later into flower, you want the plant to decide to stop taking up nutrients. Right. And I do think that happens. I think that a plant can be in an environment that has nutrients and there's some environmental change or something happens. I've seen certain plants that I feel like they just decide they're done taking up nutrients and they're just going to finish flowering and they start dropping leaves. Some strains I feel like lean heavily in that direction, like shishkaberry. I've grown it in the ground, I've grown it in sips, and I've grown it in aquaponic systems. I've seen it at my friend's grows where it does the same thing. And towards the end of flower, it basically looks like it's about to die. But it'll still just keep growing and stacking flower until it kind of trims all of its shade leaves for you. They'll just die right off and fall off, and it'll finish up, and the bud is super tasty and good. And it's like a cultivar thing. And if you've seen it in enough places, then you can do that. I think, who was the other panelist that grew it after I talked about it before? He's been on a few times. I can't think of his name now.
I haven't grown it.
There was somebody.
Yeah,
Shishkaberry, yeah. So there was somebody else on the panel here. I can't remember who it was now, but somebody else grew it. Not that's here. That's not here. Right?
Is it very fast? It finishes really quick. It's like done. Bam.
Yeah, and it starts really fast too. Like it
starts really fast.
12. It's like 3 flowers within like a few days. It's like already popping off. So it starts quick, finishes quick, and looks like death towards the end. Like it looks like you're like, man, I wonder if I'm doing something wrong. And it just stops taking up nutrients. Like it just decides when it's done, and it doesn't take up nutrients, and you can just watch it eating all the shade leaves and dropping them, stripping all the nutrients out of them. And so there's obviously variables in there. Some of them genetic, some of them genetic.
Yeah.
That we don't necessarily know how to trigger yet. But it's in there somewhere. I'm sure we'll isolate it even more.
Yeah, it's definitely true that some plants are easier to sort of on this over. I still think it's kind of possible to overfeed plants during flowering and past peak flowering, and it may have to do. I'm sort of an organic, I'm not all that. I know a fair amount about nutrients, but I'm sure a lot of people here know a hell of a lot more about them than I do. And, I feel like some nutrients, maybe it's the nitrogen or something like that causes the other ones to also continuously to be continuing to be uptaked if it's available, if it's there by the roots. Because I think it is possible to, for example, cause a plant to kind of continue to grow more vegetative mass during peak flowering or during flowering, and that maybe kind of can lower the quality a little bit as well. In other words, just sort of increase the vegetative mass of the leaf kind of in the interfloral leaflets and everything, without necessarily changing. Because I think the number trichome count number is genetic. I think that you can probably change the size of the resin globs and things like that, but I'm pretty sure, because I've spent a lot of time looking at them under microscopes and things on the leaves, that the number of trichomes per area is pretty. I think it's genetically. I think it's a genetic thing, but I think with improper feeding, you can kind of increase the vegetative mass of the plant, and I don't. and that could, you know, sort of reduce, kind of in a way, kind of reduce the potency, because you're increasing leaf mass and leaving your trichomes and resin amount and everything sort of the same. And I think it's one of the reasons why some people like talk about, Roger was talking about the other night about a plant having good smells, good terpene smells up during flowering, and then at a certain point they kind of go away. And I think that's often as a result of some kind of like feeding error like that. And it may have to do with this kind of increasing the green mass, or increasing the leaf mass in there, and just sort of spreading the trichomes out, kind of watering it down a little bit. And I don't know. And again, that's probably a genetic factor, whether the plant will, you know, it maybe if it's like a shishka berry, like Marty says, it's just not having it, you know. You know what I mean? Whereas maybe some other kind of sativa that might go for a 12-week flowering period or something like that might continue to take up nutrient, might be talked into taking up more nutrients. And so that would take, again, that would take more skill to stop, to know when to stop. The shishka berry, you don't need the skills to stop feeding the thing, because it just folds its arms and says, I've had enough, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas another...
I do think that one thing about the shishka berry that's interesting is, because I did grow it from multiple runs, is that in multiple ways, is that when it first started happening and I did feed it a little bit more, I top dressed it again, I felt like it died faster. I feel like the plants that I just left alone in the next run, when I was expecting it, I just didn't do anything to it. I felt like it just not, you know, like it was better without adding more to it. And it wasn't a lot that I added to it, just a little top dress with you know, some P and K, like no nitrogen or anything, and I didn't change my feed to the fish at all or anything like that. So it was a pretty minor change, but I did feel like it was better to not give them anything after they decided they were done.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, it's a complicated subject. There's many variables, but it is a cool one, because it's really important to connoisseur quality cannabis, and I think that's what we're about here. We're you know what I mean? I think that's,
you know, that's kind of the only market that's left for you know, whether we want it or not, that's what we got. But I think it's what most of us are about anyway. You know, like
right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that, and I think it's safe to say that every casual grower, even if they're every backyard grower, could be is potentially the connoisseur grower too, because to them, they're not commercial, for example, you know, so they don't mind the longer season, well, supposing they live far south enough to do it, sativa, you know, and flowering it for a longer period of time. They're not commercial, and they don't have to get the crop in and done, and you know what I mean? So whatever else to fiddle around with and do fun things with and everything, the home grower is going to go the extra couple of yards to ensure their connoisseur quality. I think lots of home growers all over, you know, are gonna get close to connoisseur quality their second year, you know, just simply because, you know, outdoors, I'm saying, not indoor growing, forget it, that's hard, but but outdoors, you know, you pop that plant outdoors in your garden next to your tomato, and you're probably gonna do great. You know, the hardest part is going to be the trimming and the you know, the curing and the drying. That's the most work. And who's going to really even do that in the future? You know, you're only going to probably trim the top most beautiful nugs and probably make soap out of the rest. Oh my God, that's terrible. No, we will make hash out of it. You know, I mean, seriously, if you got three 5-pound plants in your backyard, and so does your neighbor, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
So, give it away.
There was a question from Chad. It goes, what were the good points I can ask to spread the word on protecting home growers' rights to grow, protecting small farms against large out-of-state businesses? Don't let individual cities decide if they want to let cities cannabis in their cities. So first off, making sure that they do not have local jurisdiction and do not have the right to ban businesses from their town. They have no right to tell you where you can and cannot put a business. Ask if they bring it up at a city council meeting, ask them when it was that you got a chance to vote on opioid dispensaries, because I don't remember getting a chance to vote on that. And that actually kills people. So if they want to, and it generally shuts people the fuck up in the room when you bring that up. As far as why they should, arguments that will work well for why you should include home growing. A lot of patients have very specific cannabinoid and terpene needs, and they have to have it. In fact, a guy that's been on the show many times, JR Token, needs a very specific type of cannabis for his the nerve damage, because he's an amputee. And where they cut his leg off, he has a lot of nerve pain, and there's only a handful of strains that have a very particular type of chemobar that actually help him tremendously. And this same type of thing is true for people that have seizures, that have cancer, that have all these other types of things. So, and that's why they need to protect home growing. Sometimes you have to have the plant that will heal you. And you cannot rely on, because a dispensary might decide that something's not profitable, and suddenly you're completely cut off from the one medicine that helped you. And you're seeing that happen with medical patients, particularly seizure patients, are being thrown through the ringer. And a lot of times too, you'll have people that are mislabeling stuff, or maybe they didn't even get it. Maybe the person that 3 wrongs before they did mislabeled the seed. I know that we have some seeds right now that are labeled Queen Tomato that are definitely not Queen Tomato. There was no Queen Tomato on the original list. I know what they are because they were mislabeled, but things like that happen, and you could end up completely screwing someone over, or even killing someone inadvertently by cutting them off from their supply.
Yeah, and I think that on top of that, you'll see a lot of them just simply won't be grown in a commercial space. They'll argue that you could go buy it at a dispensary, and there's not any dispensary that's going to carry a 14-week flowering period sativa that is going to produce 2 ounces per cubic foot. It's just not going to be suitable for production. Nobody's going to want to flower that long and reduce the amount of time that you spend in a commercial environment that it takes to grow. 8 to 10 weeks is like max. I mean, you start talking a 14-week sativa, and they're going to be like, well, so you're literally trying to beg someone to be a grower for you, that it's going to be difficult for them to be able to do in a lot of current regulations. So I would say that as far as arguing for home grow, is that it should be a constitutional right to be able to medicate yourself and treat yourself. And besides that, go fuck yourself. That's the way that I would take it. And the place to do this, if you want to know who to tell to go fuck themselves, because that's important. You can't just tell some Joe Schmo on the street to go fuck themselves, because that's not going to matter. You have to go tell your council people. If you live in a city, you need to find out who's on your city council, and you need to vote for whoever's on your city council. If you haven't legalized yet, great. Now is the time to vote for your city council. If you have already legalized, the regulations haven't come out yet, you're a little bit late, but okay. Let's go ahead now and still vote for your council people. If you're outside of city limits, then you need to look at your county regulations in your county council in most places. And those council members you're going to need to vote for those. Are you pro medical cannabis? No, then I'm not going to vote for you. Thanks, have a nice day. And there's probably only going to be 1 or 2 in most places, unless you live in some sort of liberal area, then you're probably going to have some options. But in places that haven't already legalized, there's your options might be limited. So maybe it's a compromise. I don't know. But those are the people that you need to go talk to, engage with, and even if they don't agree with you, you need to be able to have discourse with them at council meetings, like Steve's talking about. When they start bringing up these points, and they'll bring up things like, oh, well, we got to protect the kids. From what? Opioids, alcohol? What are we protecting them from?
Yeah.
What are the repercussions? You have to ask real hard questions to those people and say,
You know how you protect the kids? You make sure the person selling it to them asks them for ID at a dispensary. Since
Right.
2012, not a single case of anyone selling to any single dispensary in any state has had a single prosecuted case of them selling to underage people. A single one in any state. The alcohol industry, not even remotely close to that.
But those are the questions you're going to have to deal with, and you'll probably they'll want you to make compromises along the way, and that'll be up to the legislators to figure out. Maybe in the end, you'll end up so that they won't have some sort of control over regulation. But the important part is that those council people will be the last line of enforcement for any type of regulation. So, outside of the law enforcement, obviously, in the illegal states and stuff like that. But when it comes to legalization, they are going to be the boots on the ground in terms of making sure you're following zoning laws or any of the other bullshit that they'll be able to come up with if the city or county becomes available. So if you're still voting on a state level, then obviously you want to shoot for state control on an independent board. Like, you don't want what happened here in Oregon, or I think also in Washington, which is where everything got grouped together with the liquor council. So you basically the same people that were in charge of distributing alcohol in Oregon, which I don't know, but a lot of people don't know, but we have state-run liquor stores. Essentially, they're only open certain times in Oregon for hard alcohol. So the idea was that since we were going to regulate it the same way that we regulated hard alcohol, that the liquor commission should also be in charge of cannabis, who obviously no idea what the fuck they were doing about any part of it. So even just the paperwork side of it was kind of a clusterfuck and became an issue. So an independent board is a great thing to shoot for, preferably state, because then there's only one of them.
And if they argue against that, all you have to do is bring up Nevada. Let's not forget what happened with Nevada. The liquor board said they wanted to do all the transportation, and they demanded it. They got their way. Guess how many new vehicles they hired onto the fleet to do transport for the entire cannabis industry? 11 for an entire state of Nevada. So they had to literally declare a state of emergency in Nevada to overturn that law and allow cannabis companies to transport their own material. So if you get, again, bring up how well these guys have fucked it up before when they try to say, oh, that won't work. Really? Because the last time we tried your idea, the governor literally had to declare a state of emergency to fix the situation.
Yeah, exactly. I think that you can definitely point to failures in other regulation, like the collapse of both the Washington and Oregon medical programs, the bottleneck that happened with certifying labs over here once the state required that labs that do testing for product had to be state certified. So in order to do testing for your percentages of THC, your cannabinoids, and your terpene profiles, and testing for pesticides and all of those different things. So in order to be a certified laboratory, you had to pay the state to do what you were already doing. So it was already annoying. But the issue is once they established that, as soon as that went into effect, nobody could get any lab testing done until that went through. And instead of just extending out that period, there was a period of time in which you couldn't get any extracts tested or any flower tested from a quote unquote state certified place, so a dispensary couldn't buy it. So there was this kind of lag time in between, and so it caused this big issue. So there are different failures in regulation like that a lot of times come in complication by going down to the city and county level. Each one of those levels has to decide on the regulations and how they're going to enforce them and find funding for them and everything. So you have all of these, you have everyone trying to solve the same problem, as opposed to the way the medical program worked in Oregon previous to legalization, it was a state-run program. So basically, if you were inside of city limits, then you had this set of regulations. If you were outside of city limits, you had this set of regulations. And that was pretty much it. And so by having it consolidated down to just to a manageable level in terms of enforcement or decision-making or regulations, it just simplifies things greatly because there's so many less people making decisions and so many less regulations that end up coming in. It's the same set for everybody across the state. So it might be difficult to agree on those, but the California and Oregon and even Washington medical programs previous to legalization were much better off, and that was how they all functioned. So I think it's much better to shoot for, if your legislation hasn't passed yet, to having it be a single statewide panel that makes those decisions, as opposed to each city and county making their own decisions about how they're going to enforce them and put things in place. So that's my 2 cents for the best thing that you can do is go to those meetings. Because the trend is that they will get some form of control. In other states where there's legalizations, and they love to copy and paste, but other states that have already legalized, most of them give some type of ability of the city and the county to be able to add their own regulations that stipulate how much you can grow, where you can grow it, where you can have a dispensary, where you can extract it, how much you can extract at a time, how much extracts can be in individual packaging for one serving size, and so on and so forth. It just gets out of control. So there you go.
I guess the other night, that guy Ed, he seemed to think that that home growing was going to be illegal, or that and actually a couple of the states, right, that recently legalized, don't they have like pretty strict laws against home growing and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
but I think that once you have federal legalization, I think you're gonna be able to grow. Everyone's gonna be able to grow 6 or 12 plants, I think, at minimum, once the feds legalize. I don't see that not happening. You can even brew up your own alcohol up to, what is it, 20 gallons a year or 200 gallons a year and 20 gallons a month, or there's some restriction on it, but you can still do that even for something like alcohol.
Yeah.
You can still make your own ammunition for guns. So it's just one of those things that it will be restricted, but you're not going to be able to. Yeah.
The thing is that it's the when down at the town meeting, when the old grandma shows up and she wants to, and she, the right to grow her medicine. You can't deny Granny her right to grow her medicine. I mean, I hate to put a point on it, but I swear that's the opponent. You know what I mean? They won't. That's why I really don't think that home growing could make it to being outlawed. It's got to go the other way, because you can't deny people the right to grow their own medicine, but you especially can't deny my grandmother the right to grow her medicine. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they already tried. I mean, they've already tried this whole not letting people grow thing, and everybody's still here. Obviously they put a bunch of people in prison for it, but they still could not stop us from growing our own medicine.
Right.
On large enough scale that would it be exported coast to coast. We had I think it was when we had Swami on, I think he was talking about the vast infrastructure that was the black market, and he really reveled in the extent of it all, and how connected it was, and yet you didn't know anybody more than 2 steps away from you, yet it went from one coast to the other. Somebody in New York City was buying weed that was grown in North Mendocino and Southern Humboldt and all those places, and it was underground from point to point. and but still made it consistently and distributed often. And so I think that there's always that point, like they can try if they want to, but they can't take away a seed you can plant in your backyard. Even if they can harass the fuck out of you, don't get me wrong, it is a choice, but you can make them come take it from you, I guess, is what it comes down to. And if it's important to you, I would encourage you to move somewhere else. It's taken me almost 2 years to the day in which I'll actually be moving into a new house from when I took out the last plants that I could have outdoors here and essentially had to shut down. So I think that if it's something, it's not going to be easy. I don't want to be able to move. Like it's tough and stressful, and shit from the county and inspectors and appraisers and all the bullshit that comes with it. So it's designed to put you behind. But when you go to a spot and research and know that you can grow there when you get there. Now, obviously, not everybody has got the ability to do that, and I get it. Some people are going to have to change where they are, as opposed to move somewhere else. And that's what we're saying. Go to those council meetings. If you got to organize to vote and legalize, still, you're actually in a pretty good place. You can learn from all of the different mistakes that have been out there in the past. You can download other legalization bills if you need something to get started with, and just start, going through and editing them and creating stuff and getting with other people that are already. Every state has got some form of legalization movement happening in it that doesn't already have legalization. So some people are going to be in places where growing, even though it's legal in your state, it's been banned in your county or your city. Guess what? You're going to have to show up to meetings, and you're going to have to confront people that are misinformed, that are not going to want to believe they're misinformed, and you're still going to have to tell them anyway. Even if it's just you standing up to them in front of other people to expose the bullshit that they're spewing, it's still serving a purpose in the overall. There's always going to be, like here in Josephine County, which is just north of me here, we had council members straight walk out of meetings because everybody in the audience is on the side of growers. Elderly people in there that are treating their arthritis. They can't afford pharmaceutical medication. Literally, like Mr. Green Jean was talking about, you can't deny my grandma medication. People in the audience, to the point where a number of them that were not pro cannabis literally just walked out of the meeting. If you got to push it that far, you're pushing the right buttons. If they're leaving and abandoning their own meeting, don't take that as a negative. That's where you're fighting them off. That's the type of resistance that you're going to get once you get down to the city and county level. It's generally a previous generation that has embedded ideas that were put into them for years. You're going to have to confront those and either get them out of office or at least not spewing bullshit that nobody will call them on.
On that point is exactly what you're saying. It also shows you who to vote out at the next round of elections. The renewable source of that politicians are is if they don't do what you need, or they're self-serving, or like you said, an older generation that's locked into their old-timey beliefs. You'll see who the people that walk out are the people you need to target and make sure they get voted out the next go round, so that you can put somebody in there that's compassionate.
Yeah, I would say, look, you can either listen to me, or we can dedicate this group of people to not getting you elected in this county ever again. And you might have to do that, but that's what you got to do if you want to be able to get there. These people are going to need to be confronted, and they pop up on every level, especially if you're not in a very liberal area. Surprisingly, for whatever reason, we've talked about this before on the podcast too, but Republicans, who are usually all about, the government can't tell me what to do. I don't want bigger government. I don't want more regulations. For whatever reason, do a complete about face. And as soon as they, hear you're growing the weeds next door, they want to be able to tell you what you're going to do with your property. They want more government to be able to manage the regulations they want to put in on the evil weed that you're growing next door. I don't know why. I don't know why they can abandon their ideals just because it doesn't necessarily, they don't agree with what we're doing with our own property. But you will encounter it. It will be difficult to get over, and you might have to just get them voted out. It might be the only option that you have to do. And if that's the case, then just, you're not going to be able to get them voted out if it's not the majority. If you can convince the majority to vote them out of office, that's just winning a fair fight after you tried to already reason with them. And if they won't listen to you, at least to the point of understanding that you can come to a happy medium with regulations to the point where, you know, they're not discriminatory, they're not over the top, nothing that you wouldn't, that they wouldn't consider for an alcohol industry. If I don't want regulations on cannabis that you don't have on scotch. And that's just kind of the only logic that you can use for them. Because you know some of these assholes are storming out of the council meeting and going home to pour themselves a nice aged scotch and smoke a cigar. Like, they have their own vices, and demonizing ours over their own vices is, to me, just like the root of the problem to start with. And
not only that, like with our city council meetings in California, we were showing up to every single, so there was 2 city council meetings a month, and we were showing up, they were only addressing cannabis at one of those 2 meetings each month. So we went to the council meeting and you know, all those ones, but we weren't going to the other one. Well, they were going to the other one and using their public time to rail against cannabis, and we had no idea that it was even happening. So make sure that you're at least occasionally going to those other ones that aren't cannabis related, that are city council meetings that are being held, to make sure that you aren't being thrown under the bus behind your back.
And forming a group can be really helpful so that you can have a group representative. You don't have to go to every meeting, but a representative of the group goes to every meeting and can report back what's going on. Because it can be tough, especially for people that have jobs, you know, that, you know, some of these meetings are hours long. You know, sometimes people have 2 jobs, or maybe they're looking for a job. There's plenty of reasons why it can be difficult to get to every meeting. But if you can, as a collective, you know, group up on whatever, you know, social media platform you want to group up on, and be able to organize just a little bit, you know, hey, I got time, you got time, who's got time? None of us have time. Let's recruit a new member. Who's got time? Anybody's friends got time? You know, like, you can definitely coordinate to be able to make that happen.
And recording it, you know, you could have one person go and set up their laptop and live stream it or record it. You know, these are public record stuff. There's nothing illegal about doing that. So you can absolutely go and, like, I could bring my laptop and just put my microphone there and record the live stream, the thing live, and then everyone has access to it when they do have time, you know? So that's another great option you can do, and that is completely legal.
It's really the one function that you can provide no matter what, which is showing up at these meetings and talking to these politicians to make sure that they're as educated as possible. Because the people that are already voted in are going to be there no matter what. So if you're not already involved and legalization is already in process, they're going to need to be educated. Plain and simple. Like, you're going to have to get out there and do it. If it hasn't been started yet, great. They're still going to have to be educated as it moves forward. So I think that anybody can show up and just make sure they're not spewing some bullshit that it is later going to become an issue that's going to prevent, you know, swaying the person that's on the fence that maybe doesn't use it themselves but doesn't necessarily care if their neighbor grows it. We need that person to vote also, and that's where it becomes an issue, is that if you can disarm enough of their argument, which is usually baseless, then there's not much else that you can do. And are there certain things that you can compromise on? Maybe. Like, do we need any sort of commercial cannabis grows within, say, 1,000 feet of a school? Maybe that's a good compromise to make. Would it be an issue? No, I don't think it would ever be an issue. I don't think it would ever hurt anything. I don't think it would ever be a concern for anyone. I think it would probably bring up property values in the area, be beneficial for the school because it would get more tax funding. But is it an area you can compromise? Maybe. But my advice would be give them nothing. Just compromise as little as possible.
Yep.
And
I couldn't
that's what
agree
it
more.
comes down to. It should be like tomatoes. Don't ever fucking forget, or let anyone talk you out of the fact that it should be no different than growing tomatoes in my backyard. Do you ever think about how many tomato plants you plant in your backyard, or you plant as many as you have space for and think you can consume? Because that's how it should be for cannabis. And anything short of that is a compromise. Can we make compromises? That's going to be up to the vote. That's what I think everybody has different opinions on that. Is some legalization better than none? Well, that kind of depends. Is your legalization just masquerading prohibition, another form of prohibition? And I think it's probably not great. There are definitely states that have built-in monopolies in their programs, which are obviously not good either. So there are levels of compromise that are not acceptable.
Or Florida, where you can't put any other plants except for cannabis in the grow. No companion planting, no banker plants. That's completely idiotic and against, best practices for organic production.
Right. And so you end up, it can be tempting to accept false equivalencies, right? Like even that it's similar to alcohol and should be regulated similar to alcohol, like the assumption that's made here in Oregon. Well, my argument has always been, should it? Like, I can put a glass of alcohol on the table, and my toddler can drink enough of it to go into alcohol poisoning and actually do damage to herself. But what about cannabis? Like even extracts. What's going to happen if you ate a slab of BHO, or you accidentally took a hit off a vape pen? Is she going to die? Is she going to get brain damage? Is she going to what? Cerebral palsy? Like what's the end result when they say, oh, we're protecting them from the kids? What are you specifically protecting from? And don't let them get away with shit like overdosing. Overdosing on what? At what level? Are you talking about to your comfort level? Like, I'm sure everybody's heard some sort of story about someone taking too many edibles and thinking they're going to die, or calling the cops because they're so worried about it. Is that an overdose? Or are you talking about overdose to the point of death or damage to the person that's doing it? Because even then, those people got embarrassed, but they're fine. So you end up being tempted to accept these false equivalencies, which is that we're protecting them from some sort of a similar issue. And I think that we get baited into that a lot, just so that we give ground, because they don't want to be completely wrong. And so there's a fine line in what areas you can give, because as soon as you give a little bit, they're going to want to take more and add more regulation to it. So it's important in every meeting that you go to make sure that you at least weed out the stuff that is just nonsense, that is just being spread like it matters or has any sort of validity and isn't being challenged. You have to be the person that says, where's your data to back that up? What specifically are you talking about when you say you're going to protect the kids, or you're going to treat it the same way as you treat alcohol? Well, why is it the same way you're treating alcohol? Just because you want adults to be able to consume it? Like, it just seems like actually identifying what it is about it that is going to be a problem if you allow it to continue. You have to really break it down to that level for them. Like, okay, well, I get you're concerned about the kids. I get that. I'm concerned about kids too. What is it that you think is going to happen when you don't have these regulations? How are these regulations going to help the kids? For instance, why is it going to make a difference if there's a Oregon State has a live stream of my compost pile? Are you actually suggesting that I'm going to have kids breaking into my compost bin and digging out literally shit covered weed and trying to smoke it, and that's the problem that you're trying to prevent? Or what is it that you are trying to see by requiring to have whatever regulation it is that you want to have, because there will be ridiculous things. You do in Oregon have to have live stream cameras to the state panel, including anywhere that you put raw material for compost. And so I think that there are levels of ridiculousness that will pass through if you're not there to stand up and say, okay, well, what is it exactly we're doing here? And some of it will be out like completely out of your reach. They'll decide on regulations that they won't even talk about in meetings, but you still have to show up and be the resistance to any bullshit and make sure that the people that are making the decisions have actually heard both sides. If the growers don't speak up and still say, hey, this shit is just still like tomatoes, like especially if you can't, you know, if you've got no way to smoke it, if you just eat a raw bud, you're not even going to get high. You know, like there are still people out there that believe that, and they sit on your councils and they make decisions about what you can do with it. And if you're not there to give them that information and make sure that they're educated, it's going to be almost a pointless battle. Like you're going to be, you're basically either going to have, like I said, either vote them out or educate them. If they're not willing to be educated, you're going to have to get voted out. If you're not going to listen to reason, if you're not going to understand data, if you're not going to look at other states for what's successful and what's not, if you're not going to be reasonable when it comes to cannabis, we're going to have to get you out of there. And that's the only success that I feel like can be had on establishing legalization that doesn't eventually encroach on home growing, is by having it follow that kind of trail. Because otherwise, by the time you get to the point where they can create regulations, if those people are still on the panel, they'll just block as much of it as they possibly can. They will listen to every person that complains. Jackson County established their first set of regulations based on 26 complaints, based on a huge county that had over 2,000 growers. 2,000 growers, not just patients or anything like that, but 2,000 registered patients. And out of those, there's only 26 complaints. But because all the council members really wanted to listen to those 26 people, and so they could raise those complaints up and say, here, look, we have these complaints and we're going to address them with these regulations. So before you establish the power and pass it over to someone, you want to make sure those people are at least cannabis friendly. You may not be pro-cannabis, but you at least have to be cannabis rational. And I think that's important. If you can't establish some sort of communication with these people before legalization comes in, then they're going to get handed the keys and they're going to be driving before you can get them out. And that becomes a problem, and home growers get squeezed out relatively quickly.
I liked Green Jean's quote there from Mr. Hunter S. Thompson. The brutal reality of politics would probably be intolerable without drugs.
Thought that was appropriate.
Absolutely. Especially since it's his birthday today.
Yeah, no shit, I didn't know that. Oh my God.
Yes. Happy birthday, Hunter S. Thompson from the great beyond. For those of you who don't know, he was fired out of a giant middle finger cannon that was paid for by Johnny Depp. Those of you that don't know about his.
I feel cooler just knowing that. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, I like Johnny Depp too, man. He's pretty cool.
Thanks to his balls-tastically amazing funeral that was paid for by Johnny Depp.
That was what is it? Hunter S. Thompson's son said about the night that he shot himself. His son said, in a strange kind of way, it was a warm family moment. And it's like, because they all knew apparently that he was like a, what do you call it, a Hemlock Society guy, right? I mean, yeah. He believed in he was planning to take his own life eventually, anyways.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, I need to wrap up.
Yeah.
I got a pretty good. I tripped today at work and took a pretty good blow to the head into the beam, one of the beams in the fish house. So I need to get some sleep.
Right on.
But I appreciate Marty with the awesome insight tonight.
Yay, Marty.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Green Jeans.
No, I was just going to say, second that too. Yeah, great.
And I'm sorry I had to miss some of it. We had a bad storm, so I'm sorry I missed. But I think we've talked about this before. It sounded a lot like something we've had before with Marty too. It's been an ongoing, like Marty said, with him for 2 years. So we've had many discussions on this. But I want to apologize for being late. We had a real bad storm here. And Steve, you said you had a friend come over. I hope you got a friend that's going to be checking on you every couple hours tonight while you're sleeping. So
yeah, yep. So
okay.
Already, Marty, why don't you tell everybody how to find you?
Oh yeah, so I'm AP Meds on Instagram, on Facebook, or not on Facebook, but I am on Facebook in the Aquaponic Cannabis Growers group. But on YouTube, on Patreon, you can find me at AP Meds. My channel is AP Meds on YouTube. So yeah, hit me up.
Cool. What about you, Mr. Jeans?
Oh, am I muted? Oh, awesome. I'm at greenjeansgarden.com. And thanks a lot. You can just email me there. Anybody's got any, questions. I type easy. I type fast, so I'll answer. Give me a long, email. I'm not shy. So thanks a lot, everybody. It's great to be here tonight. Thanks.
And what about you, Roger?
Well, you find me at Latewood at ilovegrowingmarijuana.com if you got need to contact me for anything. And Roger Latewood at either Instagram or Facebook. And as I've mentioned before, being legally blind, Facebook's a lot better for me because I can message with you there, and it's easy to use on a PC as opposed to Instagram where I struggle because it doesn't like PCs, and I can't use a little phone. So. It's been great to catch up with y'all at the end, and sorry to hear you banged your head today, Steve, but you got a pretty hard head, I think, so you'll be all right, I hope.
Yeah, I do. I think a lot of people would agree with that statement.
Yep. meant with love, man.
And shout out to Chase and Bane for busting ass this week in the heat, and last week we got most 400 and some plants out there now in 100-gallon pots. It's been a lot of work. So we got more still to get planted, and the greenhouse plumbing is almost ready to get buried, so that's going along well. And you guys can find me at ponics@gmail.com, Ponics on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify, all the places.
Good deal.
Sounds good, guys. Have a good night.
Very cool. Good night. Bom Shiva.
Yeah,
Yeah.